And we're back, Stripe Show podcast on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Travis Fulton. Thank you for making us part of your day. Appreciate everyone tuning in to Peter Ginsburg Sunday night and Monday. That was a fascinating podcast with one of the top attorneys in the country who has went up against some of the top sports organizations, including the PGA Tour, representing Vijay Singh years ago. So if you didn't check that out, you need to. A lot of good insight on what's ahead here as we just continue to navigate the waters of an incredibly fascinating and interesting time in professional golf. PGA Tour rolls on, RBC Canadian Open, and this week, the Live Tour kicks off. And this week, folks, well, actually, let's just say a couple weeks ago, Dustin Johnson and Graham McDowell were RBC ambassadors, and I'm sure the RBC Canadian Open excited to play their tournament finally. It's been a couple years. And then, Graham and DJ just drop a bomb and say, you know what, we're actually going to play in the first Live event, and we're going to play in a team competition. In fact, Dustin Johnson's team name is Four Aces. Graham McDowell, his team name, they're the Nibliks. That's the world we live in right now, folks. And to help us break it all down, Ron Kloss from BetSperts Golf. He's a PGA Tour data analyst. You can follow him on Twitter, PGASplits 101. Great follow, Ron. I don't even know where to start with what's happening this week in professional golf. How you doing, bud?
Doing great, man. Thank you for having me this week. And yeah, I mean, to me, it's the interesting thing is just trying to figure out, the motivation here. It may be the most overused talking point of the last few weeks, but you take guys like Westwood and Poulter and Mickelson. Obviously, it's not about growing the game or the cool new format. It's obviously the money. If the money wasn't flowing, there's no chance in heck they're going to be switching tours. Now, I try to dig a little deeper here. You have guys like, a Matt Jones or a Louis Oosthuizen. Like, they've come out and said, they have young kids at home. They want to be home more. Even reading some of the quotes this morning, it seems like a lot of these guys legitimately are drawn to like this 8-month layoff. We all know Louis, with his farm, I don't even think he's played. I think this recent stretch is kind of one of the least he's played maybe in his whole career. So, I just think this easier type of schedule that's going to pay them infinitely more, it doesn't excuse it from my vantage point, but, I can kind of understand it at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think from an independent contractor standpoint, which is what they are, you can certainly understand they're trying to make the most money that they can. I think most of us like to do better financially, and this is a way to do that. I mean, DJ is going to make double what he's made in his PGA Tour career up to this point. I mean, that's the kind of money that we're talking about. As we wake up this morning, there's rumors that we're talking $1 billion offered to Tiger Woods. I mean, this is the kind of money that's being offered. Phil Mickelson supposedly has signed a $200 million deal at the age of 51. DJ in the neighborhood of 125 million. You got guys like James Pyatt, who played for Michigan State, 23 years of age, 6 million. I mean, these are numbers that are being thrown around. This is generational money. Hard to argue that these guys are trying to do better for their family, more time at home. I get it. The flip side of that is it's backed by Saudi Arabia. It feels dirty. And what's the purpose of this tour, right? I mean, what is their end goal and how long are they going to be around? So we could spend hours on it, on exactly what that would be and where that would take us. And I do want to talk just a little bit about some of the players in that field, shed some light on some of the guys that you probably don't know about. I mean, you certainly know who Dustin Johnson is. You certainly know who Phil Mickelson is, Taylor Gooch, Hudson Swafford, some of those guys. But there's a lot that you maybe don't. And we'll touch at that towards the end of the show. But I want to kind of get right into this week, the RBC Canadian Open. I'm excited for this because we haven't seen this tournament in the last couple years, and they go back to an absolute gorgeous golf course, St. George's Golf and Country Club. And it's a beautiful place. And I think after the changes that they've made. I mean, the Canadian Open was played there back in 2010. 5 times, I believe it's been there. This will be the 6th. Carl Pedersen won back in 2010. A lot of changes to the course, including all new greens. The green speeds, I think, will be much faster this time around. And the rough, rumor has it, is going to be very, very thick. So there'll be a premium playing from the fairway, although at this golf course, it is fairly generous off the tee. Why does this kind of feel like an extension of Muirfield all of a sudden? Like, the rough was pretty good there, but it is generous off the tee. You have to have a short game and obviously a good putting week. I don't know. It just feels like there's some similarities happening here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they're trying intentionally to, almost make it like a mini Brookline. I don't know if we can compare it totally to that, but, some of the things you mentioned, even going back, just really quick to 2010, Carl Pedersen, the interesting thing with him is, he made the cut right on the line. And then the very next day he goes and he shoots a 60. And so, that shows me that, even though, like you said, the course has changed, the greens are completely different, but scoring, it's available here. So you can shoot a low number. But yeah, it does sound like, they are really trying to make it tougher this week. Kind of going to what you said with the room off the tee, total driving is a stat I love to use because it combines fairways gained plus distance. And, power is going to take a back seat this week to kind of precision, just tee to green all around. But going back to 2010, the average driving distance that week was 286 yards. Back then, 12 years ago, the average tour driving distance was only 279 yards. So even back then, they were still, there's still guys, if you can hit it straight, looking at the satellite photos and even some of the videos online, there's really no dog legs. So players aren't really worrying about having to, club down off the tee. I'm sure a lot of them will this week just to make sure they keep it in the fairway. But I can see, kind of like what Rory did at Hamilton. And Hamilton Golf and Country Club, I think, is a really good comparison because, he kind of overpowered the course. And so, I don't think it's totally out of the question where some of these guys could, gain strokes through distance. But it's definitely a shot maker's course. The plotter types, the Aaron Rise, the Brendan Todds, those kind of guys who, I think where accuracy is so important in avoiding that rough. These are the second smallest greens on tour at 4,000 feet. So, good drives gained is a stat I love to use also. It kind of shows. So if the player hits the ball into the rough, do they still get the ball onto the green? And so that's a stat I love to use at courses like this where you have some difficulty as far as that long rough. You have a lot of bunkers. There's a lot of blind shots this week, like some stuff I've never seen before where you have, it's almost like elevated bunkers and then the green is behind the bunker. So like you said, it's a really intriguing course and I'm really excited to see how it plays out. And then of course, like you said, the short game, you're going to have an elite short game this week. 104 bunkers, which would make it the second most on tour. And so, yeah, I'm looking for scramblers, guys who are kind of good. Now, even though it's a short course, a lot of the, par threes, I think 4 out of the 5 are over 200 yards. So I try to dig a little deeper and try to, who's good on these longer par threes. You have 3 par 5s, they're all short. So, there's a lot of different angles you could take when you're looking at the course this week.
Yeah, you make some good points there. The last 4 of the last 5 holes are brutal, right? I mean, you've got that 14th is a brutal hole, 16, the long par 3, 203 yards, and then 17 and 18, which if you and I are playing it, they might turn that into a par 5, both of them. So very difficult closing stretch. The second, arguably one of the best par 4s in Canada. They seem to really build that up, but most of the scoring you'll be seeing kind of in the middle part of the golf course. A couple really difficult holes in the first 4, and then a really difficult closing stretch 4 of the last 5. So that's Royal St. George Golf and Country Club, Stanley Thompson design, and it's going to be beautiful to watch. A lot of rain there. The course seems like it's green and plush, And you want to be playing from the fairways. Although, to your point, small greens, guys are going to miss some shots. So the short game, like last week, is going to be elevated, which is nice to see, because on the PGA Tour, the short game can be pushed down so much from time to time, and the value can not be as such as we've seen last week, this week. And we know next week at the U.S. Open, you better have a short game as well. So let's get into where the odds are at right now. No surprise, world number one, Scottie Scheffler, plus 700. There's JT coming off his PGA, plus 700. Rory McIlroy, he's at 8-1. God, I'm going to get suckered into betting Rory again, am I not? Cameron Smith at 10-1. Lowry, as we come on, is 16-1. Everybody knows that watches this pod. Sam Burns is an automatic bet for me, even at 16. He's just my boy. So we've been to the well a few times with him now. Fitzpatrick, 16, and Terrell Hatton at 20. As you look at the chalk, where does your stats take you?
Yeah, so it's a really top heavy field, obviously. For me, these are always tricky weeks, because it's like, if you take one of these guys up top, you're pretty limited with the rest of your card. And if you're not doing that, you're pretty much taking long shots almost. Like this week, obviously the odds are a little tough to swallow when you're seeing, 9-1, 10-1s for those guys up top. You can make a strong case for each one. 4 out of 5 of them have won in the last 3 months. Like, these guys have been consistently on the top of the leaderboard. Even Rory, I think his last one was 8 months ago. So these guys, it's not like any of them are slumping at all. So the thing with me is there's just not much of a middle tier this week. Those 40-1, those mid-range type of players that we typically have a comfort level with and who have win equity, they're just not there this week. When you're looking at the Adam Hadwin and CT Pan and those type of guys in that mid range, there's not much win equity there. So my confidence level isn't really high in that middle range. So if we're looking on the top of the board, Scottie and JT are the two that I love the most. I haven't pulled the trigger on either yet. Scottie is just, his consistency level is just pretty unbelievable when you look at the numbers. Like 5 top 7s in the last 4 months. Even his bad weeks, with the miscut at the PGA, he was 55th at the Players. Obviously, the weather had some impact there, but he didn't play poorly. When you look at his strokes gained, he was just barely below 0. So, and then with JT, I kind of like to look back, and I know the sample size isn't that big, but when players play the week before a major, it's just interesting to look back and see, are they treating it as a warm up? What can the numbers tell us? And, JT's only played in 5 events the week before a major, but he has gained 2.3 strokes each round with 3 top 10s and 2 wins the week before a major, going back to 2015. So again, it's not a huge sample size. Rory has similar really good numbers the week before a major. But yeah, I'm kind of going, Scheffler and JT, maybe seeing if those odds will drop a little bit, but those are my 2 guys up top this week.
Rory's just incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
I was on him last week, course, good Thursday, Friday, struggle Saturday, Sunday. I mean, it's just feast or famine with him. I mean, he's one of the most frustrating, highly skilled players watching. He's so likable, and he's on fire 2-3 days out of the tournament, and then it's the one day. It's like literally, it feels like 2 hours every tournament. The dude just disappears. Like who is this guy? What just happened? How did he just make 2 doubles in the last 5 holes? How did he just make 3 bogeys in a row? How does he hit that shot? Who is that person for 2 to 3 hours every tournament? It's just mind-boggling to watch. And yeah, you make valid points. I mean, Scheffler and Thomas, obviously, they're the 2 guys here this week. Cam didn't hit the ball as good as he usually does last week. You always worry a little bit about his driver, but I think these wider fairways will help Cam. And I'm tending to kind of lean on him a little bit here. Get his iron game, short game, and putting. I like that kind of skill set here, and I'm certainly going to lean towards Lowry a little bit. Lowry's playing some really good golf. A win feels close for Shane Lowry, and Fitzpatrick probably would like to see those fairways pinch in just a little bit more. He's like, go ahead and bring those in just a little bit more, guys. So I think that kind of hurts him a little bit from this standpoint. But what a run of golf he's been playing as well. But I think on the top part, I'm going to probably lean a little bit towards Cam to rebound with the iron game. And I think this is a good setup for him. And I'm kind of leaning towards Hatton. I really like the way Hatton is coming together now. I feel like his game is really trending in the right direction. And I think we got some good stuff coming ahead here for Terrell Hatton. Now, let's get into Corey Connors. He's 22-1. Canadian, he would love to put one away. Harold Varner III, 22. He's getting a lot of respect. I just can't play Harold Varner III to win. I mean, I've just seen way too much from him on Sunday when the moment hits. Speaking of becoming someone that you weren't, I mean, he just completely goes backwards. Tony Finau, 30-1, starting to put some things together finally. Adam Hadwin, another Canadian, 45-1. And I'll stop at Sebastian Munoz. I like Munoz this week. I think this is a good spot for him. And we know he can run up the leaderboard and fill it up. So I'll stop there. Middle tier. Anybody jumping out? You already said you don't like this tier, so you probably want me to keep going.
Yeah, well, I guess kind of the bottom of that top tier, like you said, Lowry and Fitzpatrick, they're on such a good roll right now.
Mm-hmm.
If they were close, just a little bit closer to 25-1, I'd feel more comfortable. And I still might get to both of them, both of them right around 20-1. Every time I run a model, even last week at the Memorial, Shane Lowry was number one, like literally over everybody in the field.
Mm-hmm.
He was runner-up here at the RBC Canadian Open in 2019. His quality of golf has just been, when you look week in and week out, and he doesn't have any wins to show for it. But this, these type of classical courses, that we're going to see this week at St. George, they just fit his eye, it seems, even when you look at the data, he's one of the best short game players in the field. And, these greens, they're really tricky. Tom Doak, he's kind of known for, a lot of sloping, a lot of undulations. Obviously the bunkering is really intricate. And, Lowry's one of the best guys in the field, related to the short game. So Fitzpatrick is another one. If conditions are going to be tough, if this rough is really tough, like you said, the fairways are a little bit wider, but, he's just hitting it so well off the tee. He's gained in distance. And he's another guy, if the scores kind of dip to the, 10 to 12 under range, that's right in his wheelhouse. And so, he's another guy that, I'm still thinking about that, appears to be a really good course fit. Guy you mentioned though, Terrell Hatton, I didn't really, I always kind of sour on him just because, he never seems like when he's playing in a lot of these events, these big events in America, he kind of just fades. Obviously we saw what happened at the Masters. He was horrible. But outside of that one bad week, when you look at the numbers, he's gaining strokes in every single event. Off the tee has kind of been his nemesis, but he's gained in his last two rounds off the tee. And so just that 13th finish at the PGA kind of got my attention. He gained 4.2 strokes ball striking. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him because he is. I put a bet on him last night, and so I got him at 33-1. So I think that's really good value. And even though it's top heavy, in a little bit of a weaker field, I think he can have some really good success here this week.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all good points. You look at strokes gained total, last 50 rounds coming in. No surprise. Scheffler's 1, JT's 2, McIlroy 3, Smith 4, Burns 5, Lowry 6, Fitzpatrick 7, Corey Connors 8, HV3 9, and then a name that jumps up there at 10 is Keith Mitchell, who's going to get some play at that 50-1 mark. And we know Keith can get hot. He gives you off the tee. Tee to green game, he's solid. Around the green, he can get a little clunky from time to time, but Keith Mitchell will get some play. There's Munoz at 11, and kind of waiting on Munoz. Could be an opportunity. I think he's got to be licking his chops here at this course. I think this is a good spot for him up there at this facility. So interesting to look at kind of the recent trend, coming in. Seems like a lot of shots, 150 to 175 is a number. 125 to 150. You're going to get a lot of the wedge to middle iron game. You start looking at that range, 150 to 175. Finau, JT, Smith. Those are the names that jump up from 125 to 150. Let's see here. Names that pop. There's JT again. Hadwin's up there. Other names: Matthias Schwab, Max McGreevy. Some interesting names that jump up there, but those are kind of the ranges that seem to be where the guys will be playing from into these greens. Any other like key stats that you've got there on your sheet?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, good drives gained is something I look at closely. And just going back to Corey Connors really quick, because I don't want to pass over him.
Yep.
It's tough to swallow that 22 to 1, but he does have 6 top 25s his last 9 events. And there are reports I just read that he has played St. George pretty often the past few weeks, getting some practice rounds in. Obviously, he's kind of the hometown favorite. That being said, I think 1954 was the last year a Canadian actually won this event. So I don't usually put much stock into that, but just going back to the Memorial last week, he was on fire with his irons, gained over 8 strokes on approach. And, a course like this where, you're dialing it in with these small greens, he should have an advantage. He keeps the ball in the fairway. We got small greens. Obviously, the short game is, kind of one of his big downfalls. But, if he can have one of those spike weeks on the greens, and if he's played here more than others, I think that does give him an advantage. Just, what I like to do is, when there's no course history, I know there are a few guys who played here back in 2010, but, I think it kind of levels out the playing field.
Yeah.
Because nobody really has an advantage from a course knowledge standpoint. And so, just as far as, where to miss on the greens, how putts are going to break, even the routing of the holes, what are the best lines to take, so I think, Corey being, kind of the hometown guy here, and, if he has played the course, I think, that does give him an advantage. So,
well, Tita, I mean, the driver and the irons, he can fill it up, right? And that advantage of precision in the smaller greens. And, there's times with Connors, he looks better with the short game, and other times he looks like the old Corey Connors. So that's the only, I mean, if he chips and putts last week, he may win. He certainly hit the ball good enough. So I like the idea of a Connors in a top 20. But he would love to clip that off, as would Adam Hadwin at 45. We talked about Munoz at 45. I'm taking a hard look at him. He's going to be a player that I'm looking at. Chris Kirk playing some very solid golf at 50 to 1. Mitchell, as I mentioned, he kind of runs up the board. He's at 50 to 1. I feel like I need to go with Patrick Reed again. I was touting him last week. He didn't hit the ball. He didn't hit the ball as well as he was trending up to that point. But I think this is a good spot for Reed as well. So I'm going to go ahead. I got him at 65. He's down to 50, but I did jump on him early. And I'm going to go with him again here, there. And I'm also going to play Sahith Theegala in a top 20. I think Theegala played very well last week. And I'm going to go with him again as again, I think there's a lot of similarities from what we saw last week. And let's see if Theegala can take advantage of some of his short game magic around the greens and give me a top 20. And then Vegas at 70, who just seems to be on the front page of the leaderboard heading into the weekend, which feels like every single week.
Yeah, I like all those guys. Actually, Theegala, his odds kind of surprised me, because he's kind of flashed a few weeks here, and at those odds in a weaker field.
Yep.
But just going back to a couple of guys you mentioned, I do love Keith Mitchell this week. When he had a time there when he was 66 to 1, I think, on DraftKings. Just an excellent driver off the tee. We all know that. But related to the short game though, taking a little bit longer sample size, he's actually 12th in scrambling, and Sand saves, I usually don't incorporate a lot of sand saves in my model because, you don't want your players to hit the ball in the sand, but, he's 30th. So, looking at those two, and he's a guy who kind of, when you look at his results, he kind of just consistently seems to be in the mix, 18th at the Memorial, 34th at the PGA, going back, a strong field, 13th at the Players. So, when you're getting down to this range where you're kind of sneaking into the 50s and the 60s, I think he's a really good choice here. And Patrick Reed, yeah, I'm all over him. 65-1. In a weaker field like this, I think he can really make some noise. He's kind of progressing, even though a little struggle last week, but he's kind of progressing upwards here. I run a model where I look at small greens, and so all the courses, and what I took is greens that are 5,000 square feet or less, and took it back to 2019. And so looking at strokes gained total on those courses, so we're talking Harbor Town, Pebble Beach, all these courses with really small greens. He's second in the field for strokes gained total when on smaller greens. And so what that tells me is when everybody's missing greens, like even the best iron players are going to miss greens this week. Okay, he's still gaining strokes around the green, and so that's key to me. He's sixth in scrambling, really good in sand. So even these shorter courses, I run another model where I look at just short courses, and he's sixth in that model as well. So I love Patrick Reed this week.
Yeah, those are all good points, and I felt it felt a little early last week. I went with it, but I feel like I need to stay with him, this week. So, and I will. And Thagala is, I really like what I saw last week. Let's see if he can keep it going again this week. Mckenzie Hughes, another Canadian, 80-1. CT Pond, who's getting some discussion at 80-1. Brendan Todd finally got his head above water there in the last tournament, 80-1. Justin Rose's name, always interesting as we start thinking about U.S. Open types of golf courses. He's won one of those at 80-1 and seems to be getting his game a little more organized. JJ Spawn, 80-1. Rasmus Hoygard, 100. As you mentioned, we're quickly now into the hundreds, and not much of a middle, and we're already now into the Hogards and the Pat Perez and the Dylan Fratellis, David Lipsky, 130, Cameron Champ, 130, Aaron Rye, and playing good, 130. Is he of interest to you?
Yeah, I have him written down here. I think people forget, that he's won multiple times in Europe.
Yep.
He's a world-class player, and recent results, he's got 4 top 30s in his last 7 events. And he's, the putter, he kind of gets this rap, and he is not the greatest putter in the world. He's a really good tee to green player, but he's gaining, almost a stroke per round over his last 24 events. And just at 140-1, those odds are ridiculous to me. So that he's another guy, and I'm glad you mentioned, I jumped on right at the start. And again, the thing I keep coming back to, when you're in this weaker field, it's top heavy, there's a good chance a long shot type can win this week. And so, yeah, he's definitely a guy that piques my interest. You mentioned another guy, Rasmus Hoygard, 100-1. He's made all 11 cuts this year. He's played a few PGA events. Obviously, he plays on the DP World Tour. He's got 2 top 16s in his last 3 starts on that tour. And even back to his 2 events in the States this year, he was 18th at Valero. That was a tough course, pretty good field. He was 6th at Corrales. And so, I think this is a range where you have to take some flyers on talent, players who have upside. Even Justin Rose, I think just his pedigree alone, and even the numbers, on these shorter courses, he ranks 14th for me. On smaller greens, he's 10th. Over his last 24 rounds, he's 6th in proximity. So, if he can get those irons dialed in, and of course he's had some, really bad results, but he's also had some good results mixed in, 13th at the PGA, going back to the Farmers, he was 6th. So I think this is a range where, a guy like Rose, Hoygard, Aaron Rye at 130-1, definitely guys who I could see who actually, I think we could say have a little bit of win equity for this week.
I think Hoygard is worth the look for sure as a flyer, as a just sheer talent, right? I think he's very impressive young player, as you mentioned. And I think in this range, to put one to win, I think I would go Hoygard. That's where I would go. I would run with him. And then as we kind of keep looking down, and Aaron Rai, certainly to your point, has win equity on the European Tour. Nick Taylor, 130-1. Hubbard, 140. Adam Long, 140. Griot's coming around a little bit. Matthias Schwab, 150. And then just on talent alone, there's two young guys in Smotherman and Smalley at 150 that I'll probably pick one or both and sprinkle a little on.
Yeah. There's other guys here too that I kind of when the prices first came out yesterday. Mackenzie Hughes. I know we talked about him a little bit ago, but 85-1. Obviously, he's another guy, kind of like Fitzpatrick, who kind of thrives on these courses where you have to have a good short game. And if conditions get tough, again with the hometown narrative, I can see Mackenzie Hughes. Nick Taylor, another Canadian. He's been ball striking really well. He's 7th in the entire field in approach over his last 36 rounds.
Yep.
And even going back here, another Canadian, Adam Svensson, who, when I took him, he was 250-1. We kind of saw him, pop a little bit at Pebble Beach. Another shorter course, smaller greens, really good iron player. And even a guy like Matt Wallace, who, has had his struggles.
Yeah.
And 300-1. He has had a few, I think, top 20 results in his last 2 events on the DP World Tour. So, a guy like that, we saw, how good he was. Even I don't know if it was last year or maybe around 18 months ago, but he, there's no way he would be these odds even last year. So
Yeah.
I think his struggles are kind of baked into these numbers, and so he's a guy that I'm real willing to take a flyer on as well.
Yeah, what a difference a year makes for Matt Wallace. I mean, that guy just lost his game. I mean, just hard to understand. Mackenzie Hughes, if Mackenzie Hughes could just figure out how to drive the ball better. I mean, his driver just lets him down, and he would be a we talk so much about, can he make, guys that can make a putt, right? Can this guy make a putt? And Mackenzie, it's dude hit his driver.
Yeah, he's 133rd in fairways gained.
I mean, just like,
so,
it just holds him back. So that's where I always get hung up with Hughes a little bit. I know he's probably good enough from there on. You don't have to convince me of Svensson. I'm a big fan of Adam Svensson and played him for a top 20 last week. He didn't quite get there for me. I probably do it again this week.
Is Tim Tucker still on the back for him?
No, he just played. He just did the one event.
Okay.
There at Colonial. But very talented guy. Good young man. I think his putter, it becomes a little mental at times. I don't think Adam completely believes in himself to the fullest degree of how talented he is, which you run into with a lot of players sometimes, that negative talk. Sometimes it stems from the putter. But when the belief turns on, like he's the guy that can go, and I'll probably get on him again. I think he's got a high ceiling from a talent perspective, and certainly going back up to Canada, Canadian. I'm gonna do it again, folks. I'm gonna go top 20 with Adam Svensson, and not because of Tim Tucker, who's a friend of mine in the whole bit and has been on the podcast. Not because of that. I've been a fan of what Svensson's been doing for a long time. Luke Donald, 250-1. He finished like 3rd here back in 2010. I'm sure he'll appreciate that I mentioned that.
Yeah, he's been around a while. Yeah, he fits his course though,
He does.
He's a perfect iron player. And so he's definitely a guy. Even I dabble a little bit in a DFS. Some of these guys have really low prices, for DraftKings and stuff like that. But I think he's a really good play to make the cut for sure.
Yeah.
And a guy who could sneak into like a top 30, top 40 for sure.
Yeah, Luke Donald feels like a top 40 bet to me.
Yep.
At this kind of place. Patrick Rogers is getting a lot of discussion at 200-1. as a guy that could make the cut, top 40 maybe type of situation for them. I mean, speaking of talent, I've always thought Windham Clark is another high ceiling guy. I just don't think he gets a lot out of his game. He's an emotional guy. I think he's too hard on himself. I'm probably going to pass, when it comes to them. But yeah, you're kind of looking down at this range, a course that really nobody's seen for the most part. And I find myself kind of going to the talent pool, high ceiling, who can make a run up the leaderboard, because you quickly get into the 100 to ones, and then you quickly get into the 200 to ones. And then all of a sudden you're down into the 300 to ones.
Yeah. Yep.
And as I continue to scroll down and look at these names, Ben Crane, folks, is in the field at 500 to 1.
Yep.
Wow. Mike
Even
Weir.
Charlie
Mike
Hoffman,
Weir's
I mean.
Yeah, Charlie. I mean, that's like Matt Wallace. I mean, what happened to Charlie?
Yeah, he's struggling. But I mean, 200 to 1. Like if you're just putting $5 down, I mean, I don't think he's gonna win. But yeah, like you said, like even a Ryan Armour, he surprisingly is ranked 20th in my initial model.
Yep.
I forget what event it was a few weeks ago. I think it was the Wells Fargo and TPC Potomac, which is another course I like to compare because I think TPC Potomac and St. George have some similarities to each other. He finished 25th. So definitely not to win, but I think Ryan Armour's another guy for definitely one of those top 40. I think he's going to sneak in there. And yeah,
and real quick, Goddard is in the field this week. Chris Goddard from
Yep.
Oklahoma, who one of the best collegiate players. He is in the field this week at 400 to 1. So if you were looking for kind of a young top, high-end talent we don't know much about, take a flyer, maybe make the cut, top 40 kind of play, Goddard will be interesting to see how he does this week. Lingmerth in the field. He made the cut last week. How much does that guy love the Memorial? My goodness. Yeah. David Lingmerth sighting. Wow. Great guy, by the way. Lingmerth, first-class citizen. Yeah, so, all right. So there's a few thoughts there on this field. Now, some guys that are not in this field that should have been, and we'll kind of segue here quickly over to the live. And you can bet on that, folks, too. Over here at FanDuel, odds right now, DJ, of course, 13th ranked player in the world. He's over there counting cash. 3 to 1. If that interests you. Louis Oosthuizen's over there. 8 to 1. I think Louis and DJ both have resigned officially from the PGA Tour. Now, I don't know what upside that is to resign. I mean, I don't think at the end of the day it's really going to matter. Taylor Gooch, probably the most surprising name to me that went over there. He's 9 to 1. Sergio, not surprised. He's 12. Kevin Na, not surprised. He's 16. Sam Horsfeld, I was a little surprised. Horsfeld played at Florida. 25-year-old. He's won 3 times on the Euro Tour, lives in Orlando, works with Sean Foley. Here's a guy that has won on the European Tour 3 times. Young guy, 18 to 1. He's over there. Scott Vincent is interesting. Of all the names on the first page, Scott Vincent, 22 to 1. There's a lot of people saying, who the hell is that? Right? I mean, from Zimbabwe. He's won 3 times on the Japanese Tour. Lives in Denver. That's a guy that, Vincent, 22, ahead of Bern Wiesberger? Or no, Bern's at 22. Justin Harding's at 22, but ahead of Matt Jones, who's won on the PGA Tour at 27. These are some names up top here. Now, it's not the most impressive list, but it is what it is. They're over there, and they're playing. As I just kind of work down this list, jump in as you see a name that to kind of add on. Not 16. He's resigned. No one's surprised by that. It's interesting, like Ron. It just feels like with these players, I know it's a money thing, but then the other side of it is like it just feels like they have a bone to pick with the PGA Tour, and like life was so bad with the PGA Tour, and okay, I get it. Like you're going over there, but the bone to pick with the tour is what's kind of interesting to me with a lot of these players.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, even Mickelson. I think wasn't that one of his initial complaints? The media rights. The players just weren't getting enough of the pie. Um, my biggest thing, I guess, my biggest concern, I would say, is just the talent on the tour potentially getting diluted a little bit. I
Yeah,
think like
sure.
like you said, Gooch was a huge loss.
Hmm.
That was shocking to me. And it's interesting. It's looking at the U.S. Open coming next week. I don't think they're gonna at the USGA is gonna do anything.
No.
I think what they say in regards to whether these guys can play in the U.S. Open, which I'm assuming they are as of now. But that's going to set a precedent for the other major events. And if guys who are playing on the live, play in the U.S. Open next week, it's kind of looks like they're going to be able to play on all four majors. And so, you know,
Yeah.
what's to keep some of these other guys, even as Xander Schauffele, who's kind of mentioned he's intrigued a little bit in, weeks past, what's to keep some of these other big names from kind of doing the same thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see what this discipline that the PGA is going to announce. I think they said Friday. So that's kind of going to be interesting to see what happens after that.
Well, that's when the rubber hits the road, and that's when the lawsuits are going to hit. And I've spent a lot of time on this, just educating myself on just a legal side and talking with Peter Ginsburg. I mean, my goodness, you just sit your head spinning, on what is the legality of this issue, right? And speaking to it from straight legal terms and understanding what goes into an antitrust and what has to be proven in the way of a monopoly or conspiracy, and a independent contractor, and how not having a union and the tour is not set up like the NFL or the NBA, and how that changes the game in the way it can be governed. A non-for-profit organization. I mean, there's just a lot of shit to take in, and to consider. And Peter Kent, he's talking about, okay, here's the strengths and weaknesses from both sides, but even then, there's no clear cut on how it's going to play out. It just feels like to me that as the tour governs, to keep them away from playing elsewhere completely just feels like too thick of a line to draw to me. It just feels too thick.
Yep.
And so there's going to have to be some middle ground, I think, here. And I think that's what the live wants. And you're right. It's going to hamper the tour for sure. There's no question about it, as talent goes over there and takes the money. And that's exactly what it is. As I continue to work down the list, Ian Poulter's over there. He's at
Brandon Grace, he kind of jumps out 50-1. He's a guy who's won multiple times, and he's kind of far down the board. I know he hasn't been playing well recently, but if you're looking for value, I think a guy like him, even Hudson Swafford,
50-1,
way below some of these other guys. I think there's some value there. And even, I know we talked about Andy Ogletree briefly earlier, like with the whole money thing, like he's made 3 career cuts on tour. So in 2 years, he's literally made a total of, I looked it up, $36,000 in 2 years. Last place at this first live event is worth $240,000. So just by showing up, he's literally making $250,000. And so, he's a guy who, you look at and you can kind of completely understand, his case, a guy like him, a guy like Richard Bland for sure, who's, kind of getting to that age. So those are just kind of a couple other interesting names to me.
Well, James Pyatt at Michigan State, 23-year-old.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean, rumor has it $6 million.
Yep.
To come over there. I mean, Turk Pettit played at Clemson. He was the 2021 NCAA Division I men's championship. He's over there. David Puig, we just saw him on Golf Channel playing for Arizona State, 20-year-old. He's over there. Ogletree, you mentioned, was the 2019 US Am champ. How about Wade Ormsby? All right. Love seeing. That's the first guy I thought of when the live was going to take over the Asian Tour. That's the first guy I thought of. Wade Ormsby, 42 years of age. He's won 3 times. And all of a sudden, Wade Ormsby has found himself a pretty competitive field on his terms.
Yep.
Right? On his terms, a pretty competitive field. Justin Harding's over there. He's 22-1. He's always been an interesting player to me. South African, 36 years old. Won a couple of times in in Europe, won a couple times in Asia, popped at the 2019 Masters T12. He was T19 at the Open Championship in 2021. I mean, Justin Harding's a real player. I mean, he's a good player as well. Now, he's never won in the States. You know what would be absolutely hilarious, and I'll end with this, is next week when they come over to, or not next week, but next month when they come over to Oregon, is if Louis wins.
Oh, for sure. Yep. Yeah, he's I think he's another one who's just intrigued by, getting to take a lot of time off, shorter events. So yeah, I think he's definitely a guy who's going to take advantage of what he can get here as he kind of gets older.
Ian Poulter's team name, Majestics. Kevin Na, Ironheads. Louis Oosthuizen, Stinger. Martin Keimer's playing, 2-time major champ. Or no. Yeah, Martin Keimer. Cleeks. That's his team name, Cleeks. Peter Uihlein is over there. They're the Crushers. Phil Mickelson, he's playing. HY Flyers. Sergio, Fireballs. Sign me up for the Fireballs in the team win. Parlayed with Taylor Gooch's team, Torque, Wade Ormsby, Punch. There you have it, folks. Some names, team names for the first ever Live Tour, some best bets, our thoughts on the RBC Canadian Open. Man, my head's spinning. There's a lot of stuff going on right now.
Circus.
Professional golf. So much that I don't even know what I'm looking at on my computer screen. Ron, you're the best, man. I appreciate it. At PGASplits 101. Follow him at BetSpurts Golf as well. Good luck this week. We'll do it again.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
Bet.